Aloha. Just wanted to do a side, just a quick video and talk about the whole swirling discussion and how these words are really used to divert from the bigger pictures that are being discussed, like swirling and human and love and freedom and white and black. These are all things that are used to control a dialogue, control a people's overall, like masses of people, because think of it as, like, obviously the words being spells, but the words become the people. So the words that become the people, the words that people use become the people, but also the words that people don't use become the people. So in reference to relationships, interracial relationships specifically, there's a lot of words that are used and not used in so-called white people's culture that are not even acceptable in our culture. We don't even, like, it's a joke on one hand for them and their people. And like, I'm generalizing obviously, but this matters because we're talking about, like, dating overall. Like, when you're talking about dating, you're not really talking about dating. You're talking about relationships. You're talking about reproduction. You're talking about what they call love. You're talking about community. You're ultimately also talking about revolution too, because you have the storylines of the masses intertwined within these relationships. Relationships were used as a tactic by the slave masters back in the day to control the masses, the slaves, because the slaves were controlled by paper. They were controlled by paper and change and fear and so on and so forth. But mostly it was the paper. When you were enslaved, you were going from one slave house to another slave house. In order for slavers to not take you for their own, like a pimp would steal a prostitute, you had to have your slave paper with you, and it was basically your permission slip from so-called white people or the authority or the government. See, that world of injustice has never been addressed, and their weak attempt at addressing that was the civil rights movement, and that wasn't at all for us. We've already established that was to humanize the establishment and distract from the deeper injustices that were being inflicted upon the people and the land. So all of that stuff has to be ignored in order to jump straight into a relationship. So when people are talking about swirling, you're really talking about a demographic of people that are disconnected from these storylines. They're disconnected from the depths of what's going on here. So you're talking about a people that have already been sucked into the hopeless state of being. They're already in this get over it mentality. Get over it. We should just move on. We should just accept the way society is and just not really seek justice or seek any kind of justice or any kind of even a discussion. So that's the thing. You can't even have a discussion with people. you can't even have a discussion with people because like these issues are not haven't been spoken upon the generations upon generations within those individuals who are having relationships. So like the depths of the relationships that you're gonna have in a so-called swirling relationship, when people are really talking about it, they're talking about like kindergarten relationships. They're talking about relationships that are based upon the mainstream concept of love. The love that we are talking about when we're talking about a people's love involves a relationship that includes not only an acknowledgement of what's going on, but of having an experience of what's going on, because that helps with a connection that a lot of people in relationships don't have. These connections are, at best case scenario, they're stagnant, but on a regular basis, they're non-existent. They're non-existent because what's accepted generally in the society is this lack of definition. So when people are having the swirling discussion, you're talking about relationships people have with themselves. You're talking about that's the thing. Relationships people have with themselves presuppose relationships people have with each other. So how could you have a discussion about swirling and relationships on that level if we haven't had the discussion that people have with relationships with themselves? That's not even there yet. So in reference to that, this is why the internet can have all of these discussions. The internet can have all of these different versions of depth of communication, like the truther community, the new age community, the conscious community. It's because these communities are focusing on, for example, like the symptoms to a cancer, and never really discussing the cancer. In this case, people are talking about the symptoms of a relationship and never talking about the depths of what a relationship actually is. So this is what pretty much just kills the whole like swirling discussion, because this brings it back to what I've been saying on this channel the whole time, talking about the macro. Yes, you can. This is the thing. You can change. You can change the you can change the micro while working on the macro, but you can't really, like, to like a large extent. You can change the macro or the micro while working on the macro, because it's easy to see how you are a reflection of, or parts of you are reflected in society. But when you're only told to focus on the micro, it has a tendency to disconnecting you from the macro. And that is the intention of the system overall. This is why everything has to be, all your music has to be over focused on love. All of your relationships to yourself have to be over focused on the symptoms of you, like the symptom, like the man, the woman, the LGBT stuff. These are all symptoms of your soul. They're not really reminiscent of, they're not really like a big part of, you know, your soul on a level that is, they're not, that is, you know, on a depth that is beyond who and what you are. They're more reminiscent of this experience than you, because you can comprehend, you can tell the difference between this and that. Like that part of the experience is representative of that kind of individual, or that kind of psychological experience. It might not be at all even in your world. Like, for example, our peoples are not interested in dominating and controlling the inner workings of the entire world and the masses of people around the world. There is definitely a certain group of people we call colonizers and all kinds of other different words. They call themselves settlers and pilgrims and what are they? Any kind of word to soften it up, but this exists inside the psyche, the nature of the individual that is part of that group of people. So this overcompensation of, we're so nice, we're so sweet, everything is awesome, everybody is the same, everybody is equally destructive, everybody is equally responsible for, you know, what's going on in the world today. Everybody is equally. So what happens when you think like that is that, you know, no justice can ever be sought. No stories could ever be acknowledged. So this is what happens in relationships. Like in relationships, you don't even have the ability to have these discussions, because going into that, it's kind of like kind of old school. It happens these days too. You know, people get into these relationships and then they're like, hey, this is, you know, you knew this is how I was when you got me. You knew this is how it was when we met. That whole like, we made a decision to be together under these terms. You know, I was good for nothing. You knew I did that. You know, that whole thing. And then people just, you know, waited on out throughout the years. Same thing happens in relationships, so-called swirling relationships. They're having them these days. Now they're saying, well, we never talked about this in the beginning of our relationship. Why is this such a big deal now? You know, why is this a thing now? And then so it becomes a victim discussion rather than a discussion. Like I said, in other conversation, it doesn't even need to be made. Like, this is already accepted, it's known, it's already something that a healthy relationship, people who are in a healthy relationship would have already cleared and processed in their own way, naturally, through their own experience. So it wouldn't even be something that would get in the way of a relationship. If anything, it's something that helps to empower a relationship, because the two in the relationship are now on the same page. They're struggling together, they're learning together, they're dealing with this together, rather than in a swirling relationship. These conversations, like the majority of the discussion points that are on this channel, they're not even spoken upon. Even in like friendly relationships, they don't, you know, people don't even really discuss these topics because they don't have anywhere to put this information. And when, you know, we have discussions with people who are already, the topics that are spoken about on this channel don't even need to be spoken about, because they're already like known to the depths of, you know, what that is. So This is why I said that the interracial relationship stuff and race overall plays a big part in any kind of movement or any kind of revolution or anything like that. And you'll see even in the comment section on this, you'll see a lot of New Agers and a lot of people who are still caught up in the white supremacy mindset. They'll get into their, we're all one. You're still on this race thing. Race doesn't matter. Irish slaves. We all been enslaved. This whole thing. The New Agers, in order to make that cool in their mind, they have to qualify that with or disqualify your perspectives with their alien perspectives, their extraterrestrial perspectives. So we're all from the Pleiades, we're all souls, and they just skip a whole bunch of chapters in the book, hoping that other people will either be on the same page like them and skip those chapters, or will be too ignorant to really comprehend how important those inner chapters really are. That's what's happening. The New Agers are hoping that people are just dumb enough or weak enough or been broken down enough to either forget or skip those chapters in that book so that nothing actually happens on any kind of deeper kind of change. So this happens in personal relationships. So-called white people, like in interracial relationships, it's slim to none chance at all that these white men or white women are going to be coming from the same perspective that you're coming from, because they don't have anywhere to put that. They don't have any experience in that, and not only that, the status quo, the norm of society is to act like the rest of you're basically to disqualify your perspectives, to say that that doesn't even matter. All your race talk and all your we're all one, we're all that. Just from the simple perspective of somebody calling themselves white, that is a disconnect in your world to so-called non-white people, because that term has a certain weight, spiritual weight, psychological weight, physical weight in society that the term black doesn't have. Like, it has the opposite weight in society. So if you don't have strong enough people and conscious enough people with themselves who have already cleared and went into the depths of this communication, and they're going to have a relationship that's going to be starting off with a cancer causing agent in the ethers of their relationship, and eventually it'll come down to it or not. That's the thing. People will get used to that cancerous interaction, and then nothing will change. Nothing will actually adjust in the world on the macro or the micro, or in their relationship, their interactive relationship. It's not going to really change. People are just going to get comfortable with what they've decided upon in the beginnings of the relationship. So this is where you're at today with a lot of people, and today they're just comfortable with people's not decisions about how the relationship should be, but their lack of consciousness. You have the majority of relationships, like the majority of so-called white people, the majority of white people who don't talk about this information or acknowledge it. In fact, they have to fight it. The majority of relationships that are out there are existing on that level of, just dealing with what you got. And then when you take that into account as being on purpose, then you can realize that that's ultimately what relationships are. Relationships are, once you get up in the years, like spiritually and psychologically, you start to realize what relationships really are. On the level of outside of the old school relationships, because I say that because there's a relationship that doesn't necessarily have to be like there's a relationship beyond the reactionary relationship and the reactionary relationship. So there's a relationship that people have right now, which I just explained, where people are just dealing with what they got. That is a reactionary, like an unconscious reactionary relationship. And then you have conscious reactionary relationships, um, where people are aware of what's going on, but they're just, all right, let's just deal with it because that's the way society is, or that's how we are, and we'll make it work. And then so you have conscious and unconscious relationships, but they're still reactionary, they're still reactive. That's what I'm saying. They're still dealing with the society that makes you react, consciously or unconsciously react to the situation. That's what I'm saying. So those are the two majorities of relationships that exist in society right now: reactionary and non or unconscious reactionary, and conscious reactionary. And then beyond that, once the society heals and once people heal, see that those are relationships based upon a society being broken and the majority of people being broken, spirituality being broken, psychology is being broken, culture is being broken, your food, your water, like all this shit being broken in some kind of way or out of balance. But what I'm saying is that there's another kind of relationship that can happen. When that stuff is not broken, when it's non-reactionary. There's another kind of relationship that you have with yourself, which will affect the relationships that other people have with each other, that exists outside of the outside of a world that is in that broken relationship. So that's what I was saying, is another kind of relationship realm that exists that we don't really have access to right now because of the way the majority of people in the world and are in the way, on a micro and a macro scale. So that's why I said I don't want to completely just ball up relationships into this. Oh, it's just about this. No, it's not that simple. You have the relationship with yourself. That shit's broken. And then broken people are getting into relationships and creating broken relationship babies. That exists on a physical, psychological, and spiritual level. So you have these broken people having broken relationships, creating broken babies, which are only going to be open. They're creating opening portals, um, that are only going to be resonant within a certain amount of consciousness, a certain level of consciousness. So, and if they do, go here or there, it's going to be broken or some kind of, um, twisted in some kind of way to where they're going to have to work out of that. So anyway, there's all kinds of stuff. So uh, you can see how complex a regular relationship is. Um, but when you're getting into so-called, conscious communities and people, I see all this. You have different kinds of relationships. You have relationships based upon the New Age community. You got New Age relationships. You have like vegan only relationships. They don't give a fuck about their spirituality, but if and veganism is a part of spirituality, but it's not all spirituality. This is a thing that's being pawned off with the New Agers. Like vegan stuff, like veganism is being, people are pawning that off in society as like a like a low budget version of spirituality. That's what I was saying. Like in this vegan agenda that's being manipulated by the establishment, they give a shit more. They give more shits about the animals than they do about the people. So what the side effect to that is that all these people who are in these like animal relationships. That's why the pet thing is such a big deal right now, and these commercials for all these animals and all that stuff. Um, it dumbs you down, but not only that, is that it gives these New Agers and these vegans this sense of entitlement, and this loose sense of spirituality because they care for animals. So that transfers over loosely to caring for the world. It's the same kind of loose definition or transfer about caring for global warming. It's the same sort of thing. It's like, oh yeah, we care about global warming, so we're doing our part. I drive a hybrid. I drive a Prius, so I'm doing my part. I shared a Facebook meme about global warming, so I'm doing my part. It's that whole in between. I don't really want to face what's going on. I'm doing what I need to be doing, sort of reality. It's kind of like the so-called white people that walk around. When you go on, you're having your discussion. Just imagine, like, 2,000 so-called black people having a discussion for 5 hours about how deep this storyline goes, and then a white person coming up to that group of people and being like, well, I'm one of the good ones. And like, wait a second, you're disqualifying everything that we're talking about, because this is, first of all, this is not about you. Second of all, this is to be just sucking it down to about you. You're really just discrediting everything that we're really talking about. So this is why you're not even part of the discussion. Your consciousness is not even allowed to be part of this discussion. And so-called white people can't handle that. They don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to deal with not being in charge or in control or even a part of everything, because the establishment has placed them in the realms of everything on purpose. So because this was the side effect that they wanted to have, the same way these Americans, so-called Americans, were empowered by the U.S. government to take over the lands of the Americas and just like destroy everything that was everything that is of the people and for the people of this land who are of this land. So this is how white supremacy came about, when they were lynching people, and they said it's by law. It's my legal right to lynch this Negro from the tree because he was staring at a white woman, and a white woman staring at a white woman when living while living while black is punishable by death. So it's the law. What are you gonna do? And then white people said, yeah, you know what? It's the law. You're just going to have to accept that. And they never went into the psychology of that. They never went into the psychology of the government actually making laws based upon shit like that. And then the people who benefited and were privileged from all of those rules and regulations over the years thought we would just forget that shit exists and just, would just be like, oh yeah, everything's cool. Like it's perfectly okay. We know you guys weren't the ones who did it, so that's just fine. That's all we're gonna say. You think it's gonna be that easy? Oh, it wasn't you guys that lynched and all that, so it's okay. Like, no, we're gonna have a little more deeper discussion, and then that's why so-called white people get so angry, because they have to dominate and control the discussion. And they don't want you talking about this stuff. They can't handle you talking about everything that their peoples have built up. See, this is the thing. When you talk about the establishment from that perspective, they built it. They did this. They're proud of technology. When you start talking about how pulling away from the establishment, they start, their pride comes out. They start talking about how you have a computer, you have a car, don't you have a cell phone, don't you do this? And that's them being proud of the system of racism, white supremacy, and everything that came from it. So they play both sides. They have people who play every single side of the storyline. Based upon the discussion. And what we are saying is that your games are not going to work anymore. You're not even part of the discussion, period. This is why you will no longer be a part of the discussion, because your very presence is it's affecting the whole fucking conversation. We can't even get into the regular conversation because of your emotional like internal emotional bullshit that is a side effect from this system. We can't even have a real discussion. Even with our own people. We can't even get our own people out of the spells that they have been placed in because of the distractions that your people are doing. And then when we try to have placing upon us. And this is the thing, while all of this is valid in speaking, is because, and why I shouldn't even have to say that, is because people, like you have this whole community of so-called truthers that are basically not even, they're acting as if the mainstream media isn't at all designed to place so-called white people on a pedestal, for one example, and then all those side effects that come with that. So they're acting as if that doesn't exist. And what that does is that makes it so that we should have to act like it doesn't exist. But we're not stupid, so when we start talking about it, then they have to attack you. So, I mean, there's so many different tactics that are out there, but I wanted to throw all those tactics onto the discussion table because these are all the topics for the discussion that are raised when we are talking about swirling and all this other stuff. See, these discussions aren't even made. They're see what could take to put it, to expand it out there. Like, say somebody was in a relationship. Say somebody was in a relationship for like 5 years, swirling relationship. In the beginning of the relationship, the black man, let's say a black man and a white woman, the black man had to explain a very obvious and easy, piece of racism in regular society. He had to overly explain it to his woman because she couldn't get it. She just never had that experience, and she thought in the beginning he was being over emotional or blowing it out of proportion or something like that. And you see how all of this exists inside of regular relationships or these relations. This is a real thing that happens. I'm just making this up. This is not. I'm just saying from observation of how, these discussions happen in and don't happen in relationships. So, for example purposes, let's say she finally did get what he was talking about to some degree, to enough degree to be like, man, she's a completely different person. Let's say it took him 6 months to help her realize that, to get into the 90th percentile, at least the 90th percentile of what he was actually talking about. Let's say it took a year for somebody else, 2 years, 3 years. You see all that time that is being wasted and all that energy that is being, manipulated because of one individual. What I'm saying is that all of that time, from 2 weeks to 6 months to 3 and 5 years, that shit wouldn't even exist with a relationship of two people who have already experienced that. They wouldn't even have to have a discussion about it. It would just be a sort of a regular thing. It's kind of like Trump, like a Trump thing. It's like, why are we even talking about Trump? That's not part of our lives. That's not who we are. We see how it exists in society, but we know the deeper layers of what that really means. So it's like instantaneous. Whereas, somebody else, it's a baggage. So it's a piece of luggage. So this luggage is what's being carried around in these swirling relationships, and people are carrying around this luggage and acting like it doesn't exist. And they're sweating their asses off, they're bleeding, they're being attacked, like they're not getting to where they're needing to go on a macro scale. This luggage is weighing them down, and the only reason why the luggage isn't being discussed is because society has said this is a non-issue. It's not worth being discussed because we're all one, we're all human, race doesn't really matter. And you know, these broken relationships with these broken people is normal. So that's why the swirling relationship discussion is so much deeper, and this whole conscious community and truther community stuff is so much deeper than we just really think it, because we accept the compartmentalization in the beginning. We're like, okay, this is cool, that's the truther community, that's a black conscious community, that's the regular conscious community, that's the vegan community, that's the new age community. Like, you have all these versions all over the place of all these people, and we never really stop to think about like how these groups are separated. And you can spend a whole year, like I can take a whole year off and only focus on, you know, the ins and outs of the new age community. Do I want to? No. Why? Because that's just one subcategory in the whole, you know, the bigger picture that's going on. So I'll leave it there. That's pretty much what I wanted to get in, because that's a good doorway. It's good to segue into the it's a good segue into like the relationships and the personal stuff that I really want to start getting into now. Since now that we have broken down the false identities, the false definitions, we can start getting into analyzing the relationships now. So going from words to sentences, or words from words and sentences to concepts. Right now we know love and human and unity and all that other shit. All that shit is just, you know, these are things that are used to explain something else more complex. So now that we understand that those complexities are needing to be delved into, let's start going there, and it's gonna start offending more people in many different kind of ways. But you know, that's just how it is. So, oh well. But yeah, I'm gonna I'm gonna get into this stuff, because this stuff needs to be addressed, and it's still being ignored. So yeah, stick around for upcoming videos on that. Peace.